welcome back to the Mindful Megs podcast, Organizing an ADHD Brain. Today, I'm joined by an incredible friend of mine who talks about discovering that her son has ADHD and navigating the ins and outs of what that meant for her as a mom and communicating with her child in a way that worked for both of them. While we see ADHD being talked about more and more often, the conversation is still so much in its infancy. This podcast and the ones to follow will normalize what it means to have ADHD, stories about real people who are navigating the neurodivergent realm, different ways to organize your brain, and how ADHD is not your downfall or your child's downfall. In fact, the more you know, it can help you discover superpowers you never thought possible. Let's go ahead and dive in. I'm here with the incredible Shauna B., who is a fellow podcast host. Shauna, tell us a little bit about you.
Hi. Thank you for having me as your guest. I'm excited to be here. I am Shauna B. I am a single mom of 3 kiddos, 17, 9, and 7. I work 2 jobs, one out of the home and one in the home. I'm a medical worker as well as a life coach for busy women to help them get off that hamster wheel and get back to themselves and remember who they are, as well as a fellow podcaster, which is called Release Your Inner Power Podcast, where we share stories about being a mom and an individual and how to get your me time in there. I like to travel, go on adventures outdoors, or just to explore new places. And I like making memories with my kiddos and my family and friends.
Heck yeah. I'm pumped to ask you some more questions because there's so much I know, but so much my listeners don't know. One thing I love about you is we bonded over your son. And then, of course, me, we both have ADHD. And I mentioned having an ADHD superpower. And you said, that's what I tell my son. And I loved that. So tell us, how old was your son when you found out he had ADHD?
Well, officially, I found out when he was in 3rd grade because I went to have him tested as I started noticing things in school. He was having a hard time being able to sit down and even do his homework or read things through and then remember and have comprehension and things like that. And he was struggling, and it was getting to the point where he was falling behind. And so I took it upon myself to get him tested to make sure, because it was important to me to show up the best that I could for him in order for him to continue and be okay in school. Because I didn't want him to hate school. I didn't want him to not want to, it was already a struggle for him anyways, because I think I didn't realize how much of a struggle it was. I think he was trying to put on a strong little face and be like, I'm okay. But he would tell me regularly, I don't want to go to school, Mom. I want to stay home. Can I not go to school? And I was trying to break him of just not wanting to go to school. And then realizing we started falling behind and things were happening, I was like, let's see if there's something. And if there's not, great, fine. But if there is, then I know how to help him in the areas that he needs help in, not even knowing what may come out of it, right? And it was a big spectrum of a test to tell me anything like ADHD, autism, oppositional defiant disorder. The list goes on and on. There's 10 different things. I thought it would be best if I knew as much information as I could, so then I could figure out to go from there. And when I had him tested, it was a full day of testing, but the way that they do it is really cool because they do it in different ways. It's not like what we think of testing is sitting down and filling out the bubbles or picking the answer. It's games and playing and interaction and recognizing emotions and responses and how problem solving works and just all of this stuff. So a lot of it is interactive, but it's a full 8 hours of testing to make sure that you get the gamut of all of the things, right? There's breaks, there's lunch breaks, all of that, but it wasn't extensive to the point where my kid didn't want to do it. He actually enjoyed it because of how it was interactive, which I think is really cool, right? Because somebody to sit and test, it's especially at the time I didn't know you had ADHD, but especially with ADHD for that long, it's what? That's not going to happen.
Don't sign me up for that.
Yeah, exactly. I'm anti that, whatever that is. No, thank you. So,
absolutely.
But the way that they did it, he was totally, he went back in there himself, finished the day, was totally fine. I'm like, how did you do? And he's like, oh, it's fun. I'm like, oh, okay. So they make it so it's not oh my gosh, it's testing, it's interactive. And then after the test, they call you back in because they want to go over all the results with you, because it's literally a mini book. There was so much information. I was like, this is kind of information overload. And she's like, well, that's why we like to go over the pieces with you And then we send you with the details. Then the nutshell. And then, of course, if you have any questions or anything like that, you can get follow-up and see people and they'll give recommendations and all the things. But still, I just remember sitting in there and listening to all the results. And I was just like, whoa, everything that I thought I knew or what I was doing or how I was doing things, I'm like, wow, I felt guilty at first because I'm like, I've been fighting against something he can't control and not realizing it. And now I know. So I'm like, okay. And I had to work through that a little bit. Not that I thought I was messing him up, but I just felt bad that I just didn't know or understand. But now that I did, it was like, okay, but now I do. So how do I move forward from here? And we had to change a lot of things around, which was so great. Not really. He was not liking all the change. So at first I started changing a lot and then I was like, hey, this is too much. Then I backed it up and I started doing one little thing at a time. And then once we started like catching ground with certain things, like even like TV or electronics or what style of those things were that he was like, what was in those things also, because not only did he have ADHD, but he was borderline oppositional defiant disorder. And what that means is that anyone of authority, as soon as he feels like someone is trying to tell him what to do or take authority of the situation, because he's on the line, he can be fine or he can be anti whatever they're saying, just in right off. Like, nope, just because of the way that they deliver it.
Yeah.
And so my focus was to figure out how I could guide him either to stay right there or tilt to the side of not being as much as oppositional defiant disorder, because when you get, I call it releasing into the wild, but when they get to be older, right, and you release them into the wild, you don't want them to be like losing their beans like out in public and all that, because then
Right.
disastrous things can happen. So for me, I had to pay attention to what he was watching and the games he was playing and what he was doing and how he would respond to certain things or how he would respond to me being a mom, because that's an authority, right? So it's like, how do I deliver certain messages and how do I do all that? So I had to juggle a lot of things. Plus, I had to learn tools and things for him because what I thought parenting wasn't best for him. So I had to navigate that whole thing. So it was a big learning curve for me, but at the same time, I wanted to dive down the rabbit hole and learn all the things because it was kind of fascinating and cool to me. The more I learned about how his brain operates and how he can process things and who he is and how he is with his specific diagnosis, I was just like, dude, I want to learn more about your brain. I always say that I would love to have his brain because the amount of things that I could do or come up with would just be like, woo! It was just so great. And he's like, oh, he thinks I'm crazy, but I'm just like, man, that is a superpower. And that's why when you said that, I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I say to him. This is a superpower. And I always say, are you ready to tap into your superpower, dude? Are you ready to tap in your superpower? Like when it comes to school, I'm like, hey, excuse me, are you ready?
Yes.
Are you ready? Like, I'm ready to help you. Are you ready? Because you can't force somebody to do something. So he has to be ready. But I always call it that. And he's always like, Mom, like, whatever. Get out of here.
Oh my gosh. I'm so impressed with everything that you did. Obviously, you're giving us a nutshell version of what happened during that time because there's a lot of emotions that go into your parenting one way. And then now you have to navigate this other space. And I know when I found out when I had ADHD, I did a lot of like looking back in my memory to see like what was that, what would I have done differently if I had known that I had ADHD. So I can't even imagine what that was like as a mom as far as the emotions go. And I think it's so incredibly amazing that you look at his ADHD as a superpower because I hear so often and I see it. I even had a conversation with someone the other day where they look at it as something that brings someone down. And obviously, if that's something that your parents been telling you your whole life, then that's what you're going to bring with you into the real world. And what did you say? Releasing them into the wild? Like if you
Yeah.
release your child into the wild and they think that ADHD brings them down, I mean, that's no way to become an adult. Oh, I'm so impressed with you, Shauna.
Thank you. It's interesting. I'm gonna stir the pot a little bit here. Interesting that when you say like when parents can kind of figure it out and like how I was doing, trying to understand it and then try to learn these tools. So it's not like there's something wrong with them. It's very interesting because even at home with what I was doing, it was still so much of a struggle for him in school. And it was very frustrating as a mom because I had to go through things like 504 plans and IEPs because he can't learn in the normal way that society believes in learning of school. Like there's certain things that he is not capable of doing. And so he has to have different tools for him to absorb things. For example, if you want him to read a book, that is not happening. That's not happening. He has to
Mm-hmm.
listen to it and then he can tell you what happened. But if you tell him to read a page and then what happened, he's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Who's the main character? I think his name is George. Is that right? And it's not, it's just because in his mind, he's reading, but he's like, I gotta go, I want to go hang out with my friend Nate and I want to call this person and oh, I gotta clean my room as he's reading. And then he's like, wait, hold on, what was I just reading? And then he starts feeling bad about it. And so it's interesting because school is such, unfortunately, a bad, like tarnished memory for him. I mean,
Yeah.
he's in his last year of school now, but he has really struggled, like really struggled with school. And I think the thing for him is human connection. So if his teacher believes in him and his teacher really tries and sees that he's trying and that he's not doing X, Y, and Z, he might be doing EFG over here. But they're like,
Sure.
oh, but he's still getting it done and he's still doing the thing and they work with him. He would try so hard in that class anyway. But the
Yeah.
second that the teacher is like, oh, you're trying to be manipulative and you're trying to skate out and do the easy way. And he's like, I'm out. And he's done.
Yeah.
Like, I'm telling you, done with the class. Like he will not try. He does not like the teacher. And then now they're calling me in for meetings. And then we're talking. And then I'm explaining this to them. And it's crazy to me. It's crazy to me how not all of public school is like this, but it's crazy to me how some teachers are literally so biased about it that it's almost like, oh, well, you're the mom. So of course you're going to say XYZ. And that's why there's IEPs in place. No, that is a legal document to protect him with the skills he needs to complete his school. And I am a little bit of a fighter. And so if I go in there and they're telling me, well, Torn's doing this and that, and I'm just like, okay, well, I need more of the story here because just because he's
Yeah.
doing I need more of the story. And then, well, if you try this and you try this and this, you really have to advocate for them. And I spent years doing this. I mean, I'm talking phone calls and meetings. And when it got into middle school, when there's like 6 teachers, I'm like, holy bananas, this is a lot. Like this, because
Yeah.
some classes would be fine. They're like, oh, I don't even know what you're talking about. And I'm like, yeah, because your connection with him is fine. You're showing you care. I mean, to him, I was just talking about this with some ladies the other night. It's so interesting how when you get something negative happen to you, it takes like, let's say one thing. What's wrong with you? Why can't you do it like this? We'll say that. Why can't you do it like this, like in school? Well, now it takes like 10 positive things to counteract that one thing. Him during school, every class, depending on the teacher, depending on who he was around, I'm going to say he was wrong, bad, and not doing it correctly at least 20 times a day, right? So then he comes home to me. I got a lot of work to do, girl. That's like 20
Yeah.
posts. And I got to counteract that. It's like, okay, here we go. And it's just trying to focus on the positive with him, on things that he would do, even if it was like he sat down and did one problem in math. Sweet. Am I going to make him do the whole sheet because he's incapable of finishing it? No, I'm not, because he sat down and he did the first one, and I'm not going to fight with him for 2 hours on finishing the paper because what's important here? That he
Right.
tried or that he did it like everybody else wants him to. Well, if I give him kudos for trying, concentrate on the positive, maybe I can plant some seeds, maybe I can counteract that. And he's really struggled through that. He's really had to work through that because of outside influence that is not in your home. So yes, you can have good tools and you can have that and you can put all of those things in place. With my son, particularly with the connection that he needed with the teachers that wasn't there, was the breakdown for him to be as successful. I mean, we've done every kind of schooling you can possibly think of with him. And finally we
Wow.
found one that worked for him, but like public
Yeah.
school wasn't it. So we pulled him from public school. I got homeschool certified. I homeschooled him for a year thinking maybe if it's me, if I'm his teacher, maybe it would be different. And that was not going, that was not working,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then we went into this, it's like an online school space where he can do online, but it's when he can, because there's times where he's on Like when you get hyper focused and you're just like
Heck
on
yeah.
it and do all the things, right? Check all the boxes. He can finish a class in a week because he's just like do. And
Yeah.
then there's times where he's like, I'm not feeling it. He can't get into it. He's not motivated and that's just not the jam. So fine. Then you don't have to be in school for 3 days because you're still getting your stuff done when you're on, right?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah, that's interesting.
yeah, so he thrived in that environment and has done way better with that. So it's like me as a parent, I got to let go of a lot of expectation that I think should be happening or that is the
Yeah.
norm or whatever. What is that? Well, like I said, throw it out the window. You got to start over. You got to do it new. You got to try and figure out what's best for your kid. And sometimes you have to ask them, especially when he has ADHD and borderline oppositional defiant disorder, and I don't. I am not even going to begin to understand feels what he feels, thinks, any of those things. And I have to ask him. He has to tell me. He has to tell me what he needs, what he wants, how he thrives. Is this right? Does this feel better? Are you doing more? And then, of course, paying attention to his actions on the back end and seeing how that goes,
Sure.
seeing if he's crabby. Is he fighting with me more? Is this
Uh-huh.
not happening like that? And if it's better, this is working. Because I mean, when he had a bad taste in his mouth about school, he's not going to like school forever. Like that's just his thing. He's not
Yeah.
going to like school. Great. Okay, we've accepted that. Moving on. What do you have to do to get done? We know you don't
Hmm.
like it. Okay. So what do we need? What do we need here? And then if he tells me, because that's a lot of our fighting would be about that, because I want him to succeed. I want him
Yeah.
to do well in school. I want him to be like a contributing member of society and like happy, right?
Yeah.
And I gave up a long time ago that like college may not be his thing and that's okay. Trade school may be his thing and that's fine. He needs to tell me what his path is, where he's going to be most happy because that's important to me. But I had to let go of a lot of expectation. And then he's not graduating into high school and doing the whole thing. It's online school, so it's completely different. I had to get used to this new stuff that I didn't know. So it's kind of like me discovering it at the same time. Okay, we're doing this together. What's going to happen with this? Because the norm that I knew was just the path that I took, and this is all different. So
Yeah.
it's all learning process for me, but like letting it go. It's not in my timing, it's not in my expectation. It's how he's going to be successful and how he's going to thrive and how he's going to do the best way. And then for me to nourish and support that. So there was a lot of fighting when we did this whole transition with online school. It's like, have you done your school? Have you done your school? Now we're fighting. And then sometimes it's 2 hours because we got hyper focused on something that we're fighting about. So the fights last for a long time. Then when I'm like, what? I care more than him. So I'm going to back up. And I'm like, what am I allowed to do here? And he's like, what do you mean? And I said, you don't like me asking you about school. It's a trigger. Okay. So how do we fix that? And he's like, how about once a week you just ask me how I'm doing in school? Do that. And then, do you know how hard that was for me, girl? I was like, once a
I
week?
can't even imagine.
Like, I was like,
You gotta let go of that control, and that is hard.
once a week? I'm like, okay, so I'm working through my stuff once a week.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, but then there's no fighting. There's no fighting.
Wow.
You working on it? Yes. Do I ask him once a week? Yes. I'm like, okay. And like, let that go for a little while. Let that go for a little while. And then when it starts getting to it's his last year. So I'm like, okay, does he have enough credits? Did he get all of it? I tried to stay out of it because it just stressed me out. I have to like let that go.
I really love that. And I have to add to that because yesterday I had this period of time where I had so much to do and I couldn't do it. Like I was sitting there in ADHD paralysis, and the only person that I have to answer to is myself. But I was still being so hard on myself in that moment. But if there was anyone calling me up and asking me what I was doing or if I was doing it, I think that would have added that additional layer of, holy crap, I can't function type of thing. So I think that that's so powerful that you asked him what he needed and that you reined yourself back. I think that that's such an incredible mom move right there. And that's just going to empower him for the future to be able to tell people what he needs versus just accepting that people are going to act a certain way around him. Like, oh gosh, you're setting him up so beautifully for his future so that he can be an incredible contributing member of society because people with ADHD are known to be of the entrepreneurial spirit. So he's got this. And it's because you're his mom. I'm going to continue to tell you that as I continue
I
to
love that
listen
you tell
to,
me that. That helps me. Yes.
oh, Yes, 1,000,000%. I just think it's so cool because it's not as if you've gone into this blindly and you're just like kind of trying all these different things. You've done research and you've done your homework to figure out how you can show up best for him. And I think that that is love in the true sense of the word. You talked a little bit about the tools that you guys use, and one of them is just asking questions, asking what he needs. But have you noticed anything that he does on a regular basis that helps him manage his own ADHD?
He's organized at times and then chaotic at
Yeah.
times, right?
Hmm.
So it's like, but I do know that if he has things that remind him, because one of his things is forgetting stuff. So if he has ways of reminding him, I know that one of my tools is like even things like chores, right? That's not his jam. If it's his jam, it's happening. If it's not
Yeah.
his jam, it's like boop, right out. It's like in and out.
Hmm.
Like I'm not even keeping that. Why? I've got too much going on in here. That's out over here. And so
Yeah.
I know that if I'm like today, like in the morning, today I'm going to need you to take the trash out. He'll be like, okay, I already know that I'm going to have to say it like 3 more times. I already know that. And I'm okay with it. In the beginning, it was hard for me, but now it's like just the flow, right? And so now with him, I'll say it one more time and then I text message him and now it's on him. Now he writes it on his board, puts a reminder in his phone. And sometimes that's our little joke. I'll be like, hey, look at this handy thing right here. You can put a reminder and it dings and you can even label it. And he's like, Mom. And I'm like,
Gosh.
just saying.
It's like you're talking to me though, because I still need reminders and I've lived with this my whole life. So it's beautiful. It's good that you're teaching him this.
It's, I try to be silly at times with it. Like I'm being sarcastic, but it's cute because he'll smile like because he's like yeah. And then I also notice there's times where he's what I call on, like when he's like super hyper focused about things, or like all of a sudden he's cleaning his room or literally rearranging everything. I know, do not talk to him, do not
Mm.
engage, do not interrupt, do not whatever. Like one, he's cleaning and he's a teenager, so woo woo to that. And then
Yeah.
now he's cleaning his room or whatever the thing is that he's doing. I just let him finish it and do whatever he's doing and don't interrupt because I don't want to interrupt the pattern to where then he then stops in the middle and then loses the steam and then stops or gets derailed. So it's kind of a thing in our house that if he's doing something, and sometimes he has younger siblings, and so sometimes they'll go and try to talk to him or whatever, and he'll be like, I can't right now. I need to finish this. So he's very verbal with what he needs. And I think that's because one of the sayings of my house is people don't know what you need until you ask or say what it is. You
Yeah.
need to ask
Beautiful.
and say what it is. You cannot assume because we live with you, we know what's going on up there in your noggin with anyone,
Hmm.
not just him, with anybody. If you need something, you need to say, I need you to get out of the kitchen while I'm cooking. I'm sure every mom says. So like it's
Yes.
like you have to say what you need. You can't just assume just because they see and all of the things. Like you just
Yeah.
need to speak it. So there's a lot of cues that I've followed because I've watched, see if he's on, leave him alone, especially if I like open the door to talk to him. Like I could need to tell him something so bad because I'm afraid I'm gonna forget, right? And I'll open up his door, and if I see he's doing school, I'm like, okay, and I'm like closing the door, and then I'm like, crap, and I have to go write this down because I'm gonna forget because I'll have to write it down to remind myself to go back and tell him because I don't want to interrupt him when he's doing his stuff.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
I think that is a powerful tool for parents to have, just kind of knowing what that hyper focus is and when they're concentrating on it. My husband and I talk about it because he has ADHD too. Our household is kind of hilarious, but with his ADHD, right, when we're sitting there and I'm working from home sometimes, if he's home and then he sees me doing something and he tries to share what he's doing, I'm like, we can't do that. Not a thing. Because my brain is going to get derailed and then I'm not going to be able to focus on the things that we need to do. So that is absolutely incredible. What kind of advice do you have for moms and dads out there that are navigating the ADHD space, either for the first time or maybe even years into it?
Oh, there's a lot of things I want to say.
Right? I bet.
I give you ones that were hard. Okay. So there's a couple of them. One, at least for my son and his diagnosis. So his emotional regulation and his emotional recognition is not where it's not developmentally where his age is. Okay. Because he has so much processing going on and so much going on in his brain that he was behind with that. So when you look at him and he's like this teenager and he's big and like, because they look big because they're 15, now all of a sudden they passed the 15 mark, so they know better. But do they? And I had to really check myself with his emotional regulation and recognition. And then if there was a misunderstanding, there needed to be a conversation there, because I needed to understand what he was seeing or what he was hearing, because just because we know what we said, that doesn't mean it was received in the same way either.
Yeah.
And I need to understand that, so we're not fighting all the time.
Yeah.
And so it took a lot for me. I had to rewire that for myself and be like, why do you feel this when I say this? And really understand what he's obviously not in the moment. This is later, but like to really understand the recognition of what you're saying as well as their response. It was not what I was expecting from him. So it's like learning that, especially the like preteen years when all the things are
Oh
happening.
gosh.
That is bananas. Okay. Just
Yeah.
warning, bananas, expect it. It's crazy town. And it's like, okay, we're doing this. We're in the trenches together.
Yeah.
But I feel like that helped me a lot, was to fully understand it. And I mean, things were crazy sometimes. And then the other thing that I would say is I could sit down and have conversations with people and talk it out to the end of the conversation. That is not reality with my kid. When he's younger, it was less time. So I'll say 2 minutes, but I got 3 minutes tops to pack a punch with what I'm saying, to receive it, to hear it back to me, to understand. We're talking like lessons here. So how do I say this in the like punchiest way possible, in a way of where I'm teaching him something to where he can grasp onto something in hopes that I plant the seed. Am I going to have this 3-minute conversation 20 to 50 times? Yep. Yes, I am. And is it going to take years of practicing it? Yes. Yes, it is. It's not going to be, oh, I got this tool to help him out, and if I use it for 2 months, we're going to be great. Bat that away. We're going to do this together, and it's going to be the long run, and be okay with it. You're going to have to let go of the expectation of what it should be, because you will see it come back around. You will see it and be like, oh, there it is. I planted the seed. Now I see it. Now he's getting it. And then you can move on to something else. But it's super important to realize that you can sit down with him for 10 minutes and do the whole blah, 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 blah. And that's what he's hearing. Blah, 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 blah after 3 minutes. And you're like, you can look at him and see it. Yeah. You can look at him and see the light switch flick, and you're like, oh, he's done. Okay, great. So I'm not done, but
Oh my God.
so that's just the way that it is. And that's okay. That is fine. You're just going to have to have more conversations, like in a nagging way, but you're just going to have more to remind. Like, I have the fastest family meetings in the history of time, and which is kind of cool, because I know it's like, okay, I have 10 minutes max and I let everybody talk, but I believe my daughter is also on the same train as my son. And so I know we're kind of balanced. It's like my middle kid and me have similar wiring, and then my oldest and my youngest have similar wiring. So I know that it's like, okay, 10-minute family meetings. Is there anything else? Like, it has to be kind of like fast pace, check, short little things to say. And then we write it down. And then sometimes I have, like, my family's very big on pieces of paper on the refrigerator to remind us this is what's happening.
Bullet point.
This is what we're doing. And then if we forget, it's like, see, it's right here. Just gentle reminder. See, it's right here.
I love that. I'm laughing so much too, because obviously it's hereditary, and myself and my husband have ADHD. And so we have a 6 and a 4-year-old. So I see it in my 6-year-old. I'll sit down thinking that I'm going to have this beautiful teaching moment with her, and I've already created it in my mind. And I'm telling her, and it's like a 1-sentence lesson. And then she's literally already like onto something completely different. Whereas my 4-year-old, like the other day, I organized the garage and I have a specific spot for her helmet, and she went and put it back. And I'm like, who are you? And where did you come from? Because I think as I'm navigating this space, I'm like, I think she's the only like quote unquote normal one in this family. And I don't want to say that, right? Because obviously neurotypical versus neurodivergent, but gosh, it's hilarious to hear you talk like that. And it feels so good to hear you talk like that too, because especially someone neurotypical navigating this space, and then me being neurodivergent, I think there's still so much I can learn from you, right? And hearing what you've gone through. so that I can show up in the best way possible. And really, sometimes I think it's just setting a reminder that today you might not teach a lesson, but if you do, you're going to have to repeat it 20 more times, and that's okay.
Well, it's interesting too because he is now 17, right? And I've gone through all of these years, like short to the point, bullet points, short conversations. And so a couple of years ago, when I opened up my business, I have to remind myself to be longer in explanations. You can talk and say the things and you can do all that stuff because I'm so like do and like quick to the point and like all that. I have to like train myself in the professional world to have longer and more descriptive conversations.
We do have to retrain ourselves. And I think coming back to what you said earlier about him not being able to read something, I think that so often, well, we grew up in a society where you learn a certain way. And if you can't learn that way, you're going to a special room somewhere else and they're trying to teach you, but you're always labeled as someone that, I don't know, can't learn the right way. Right, in quotes again. And that's difficult, but I resonated with that so much because I listen to everything. And when I say I'm reading, I'm like, well, I guess I listen to books, but I read all the time. And I even have them on 2 times speed because it helps me when I'm doing something, when I'm organizing a bathroom, or even when I'm organizing a client's home. I have a book in my ear so that I can learn and I can absorb. And it is a superpower, and how cool. It's a part of my personality. This is who I am. It makes me who I am, and I'm going to embrace it to the fullest. There's nothing that we can't do ultimately when we put our minds to it. And when you said, like, I would love to have your brain sometimes because I'm so curious of like what I would come up with. It is overwhelming, but yes, there's a lot that's going on up here all the time. And this is, I mean, it's just so fascinating hearing the progress that you've made with him. And I'm so excited to see what he does one day. Like, have you noticed something
Ew.
that like he's super interested in and he does get hyper focused on?
Well, right now it's funny because he's done a lot of busy work jobs, and the one that he's in right now is he works for like a tire place because it's like constantly moving fast. And
Mhm.
he likes to keep moving. So then he doesn't get bored because that's his thing. If he gets bored, he's done, right? So
Yeah.
he's thinking about becoming an electrician for that exact reason. You're like
Oh,
constantly moving. And so I'm pretty sure he's probably going to go into a trade. I don't know if it's going to stay electrician, but that's just what he's thinking of doing now. And I think it would be good as long as he's on his feet and he's moving and using his hands, it's going to be the best for him.
yeah.
I'd like to go back though and say one more tip. When you said that, like when you're organizing something and you are listening to a book, it helps you focus. So that was another thing I had to let go of as a mom was there was times when I needed to talk to him and he would be playing a video game so he could hear me. Because if I tell him to stop and look at me, what's he doing? I'm staring at my mom and I'm looking at yes, I'm paying attention. I'm paying attention. Do you think he's hearing anything I'm saying?
No, because he's thinking about his video game.
Or he's thinking about looking at me, like I'm looking at her. So it looks like I'm paying attention. Like he's focusing on his body language and what he should be doing to show me that he's listening. And then
Yeah.
I'm like, what did I say, buddy? And he's like, oh no. Like, oh man. But if there's been times where he's been playing his video game or he'll have what we have fidget toys like crazy in this house. So
Yes.
he'll be like using something fidgeting or he'll play his video game and then I'm like, "Can you repeat what I said?" And he will repeat it word for word and I was like, "Yes." So I had to let go of because he doesn't
Mm,
look like he's listening doesn't mean he's not focusing on what I'm saying and that was harder for me, obviously, than him. So
yeah.
I'm glad that you said that when you were organizing and listening to something and it's just like your focus is just different. It can be like that sometimes when you're talking to them. Helpful. That was helpful for me too.
I used Silly Putty this morning so that I could meditate. My brain was so on top of the world that I couldn't stop it from going. And I wanted to meditate, but I had to use Silly Putty to keep myself grounded in a way that I could focus on 2 things. And I hate the word multitask. I don't think that it's a thing that anyone should be good at because then you can't give your full focus to one thing or another. But my 6-year-old told me the other day, she goes, Mommy, sometimes I just don't know what to do with my hands.
Mhm.
And I was like, wow, I can't believe you even have the competency to tell me that. That's so impressive that you can express to me that you have fidgety hands. And so I asked her, I was like, so what do you do at school? And she goes, well, normally we're writing or we're doing something where I feel like I can play with my hands. But I think that's so interesting. And fidget toys, yes, for days, that is an incredible tool. Honestly, it got me through sitting at a desk in the corporate world for so long. That's powerful. I think that's so powerful. And when you say these things, I think it's normal for us now, right? Because we've discovered it and we know it. But I think for so many people out there, they don't realize. And before I was diagnosed with ADHD, I had no idea Silly Putty was a tool that was helping me. I just really like Silly Putty.
It's definitely when you start like investigating it, it like cracks open your world. Like when I found fidget toys, it was like, yes, like I was so excited. I was like, let's get the stool. Let's get the, like, I was all like, yeah, here's a whole basket of stuff. What do you want?
Yeah.
It was like, I loved it. And sometimes I even find myself using them.
Absolutely. I think it's so fascinating how amazing you are a mom to your kids. And then you work two jobs, you're a podcast host, you do so much. I'm so impressed with you on a regular basis. So tell us a little bit about what's going on in your life right now. Tell us about your podcast. Tell us about anything else that you're promoting.
I work in the hospital because I love to help people. That's kind of always been my shtick since I was younger. And I own a coaching business that helps busy women really get off that hamster wheel and get back to them. I think we find that being moms and having all of our hats and doing all these lists and all the things that we kind of get lost in a fog and we're stuck on like the same thing every single day. And then at times you'll be reminded of like, what do you want to do? Or what do you want to eat for dinner? And you're like, I don't know. You'll forget, or wait, what's my favorite color? Like what? Just because you can say
Right?
everything about your kids, favorite color, what their sport is, what they like to wear, like you can, the list goes on, but just because we're so used to making sure they're taken care of that we forget to come back and tend to ourselves. And so
Yeah.
I like to be the reminder of tending to ourselves first so you can show up the best for the rest. When you really take that time, you're running from a full tank versus an empty tank. What the big push for me was leading by example and showing my children what they also should be doing. I don't want them to grow up and also be living their life from an empty tank. I want them to live it from a full tank and help whoever else around them. But it starts with home. It starts at home and with you. If you show them, they're going to see you first before they hear you.
Beautiful.
And
Yeah.
so pass the baton that way by leading by example and remember. And eventually, when they leave the house, you still have you. It's not like, oh, now I have to go start over and remember who I am. And not only are you the birds are leaving the nest, now you got to figure out who you are. If you don't lose yourself along the way, it's so much easier to have you and to do the things because that process of filling yourself up and you're not as lost also once they leave the nest. So I like
Right.
I like to go to the mind gym, if you will, and really get that mean girl voice silenced and train your dragon and all the things so you can have a different mindset about things when you are working through stuff and with your kids and filling yourself up. It's similar with my podcast. My podcast is called Release Your Inner Power Podcast because, again, like I said, we have a bunch of hats and we have superpowers that we utilize for our everyday life and what makes us who we are. And filling ourselves up and sharing our stories and how we got through these tornadoes and trenches as moms or as individuals make us who we are today. And everybody has a story and everybody has a superpower that really describes who you are. And ultimately, that's what I'm trying to do in that space is share stories so people aren't alone, for connection, to really feel like they have a place to listen and be heard and seen. And so I have that and a bunch of other things in there that helps boost week and month and year, whatever you can take out of it. That's all I want to do is help. So yeah.
Heck yeah. I love that. Well, everyone should go and listen to Shauna's podcast because it's amazing. I've learned so much listening to all the mamas that you've had on there. And I think what's also really fascinating is listening to the moms who have smaller children too, right? Especially like coming out of the baby stage, that was really, really difficult for me to navigate. And so, yeah, seeing these women out there who are powerful and can share their stories is really awesome. So thanks for empowering them and thanks for being here. And
Yeah.
thanks for supporting me. I loved hearing your message today, and other people will love to hear what you have to say too. It definitely resonated. Any last thoughts?
Honestly, just make sure you take time for yourself. If you're trying to parent a kiddo, and sometimes things are going to be a struggle, and when you're trying to understand and move through it, and it's super, super important that you take breaks and super, super important that you fill yourself up so you can actually be there for your kiddo.
Brilliant. And then ultimately, you're just going to show up as a better parent when you take that time for yourself. Awesome. Thanks so much, Shauna. That episode was so amazing. Shauna really opened up about all of the experiences she had when she discovered that her son had ADHD. And it sounds like she's a pro at it now because it's been about 10 years of her navigating this space and really learning how to communicate with her son. What I love about this too is it's not as if it's going to be an instant change right away, which I think a lot of us want. We want to know what it looks like to have ADHD, how to communicate with someone, but really it's going to be different for every single person. This podcast is not about giving out medical advice. I am not a doctor, nor will I ever pretend to be one. I am simply a woman with ADHD, and I want to normalize the conversation about how this is a normal thing and it's an amazing thing. I think what's really cool about what she said too is having her son communicate and figure out what he needs. That's something that my husband and I work on all the time with each other is what do we need from one another so that we can really figure out how to navigate this ADHD space. Thank you so much for listening. If you loved this episode, please rate us. Please tell us what you thought. Please go ahead and send me an email. It's meg.fromtheheart@gmail.com. Feel free to follow me on all of the socials. I'll go ahead and put those in this show notes and interact with me as much as possible. I want to hear your stories. I want to hear what kind of stories you want to hear because the more I hear from you, the more I can elevate this podcast to the next level. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I will see you next Monday.